Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Katie. And I also wanted to thank David for that wonderful presentation as well. Because I work as the SVP of Research at Interpret LLC during the day, and at night I'm at Indy. So it's going to be really interesting to take a look at his solution. So my part-time job can also pay some dividends as well. So I'm the SVP of Research at Interpret LLC. This is my first time in Singapore. I've spoken probably at 20 to 30 different industry conferences around the world, presenting and moderating panels, probably more than 100 of them. But I have to say the food here is the best, period. And a little bit more information about who we are. As Katie mentioned, we work with a lot of the major entertainment companies, video game, movie studios, toy companies. On the video game side, we pretty much work with everyone, the tier 1 publishers, Sony, Microsoft, Warner Brothers, Ubisoft, Activision, Blizzard, EA, you name it. And we also work with a lot of mobile game companies like Tencent, Kabam, Gree, as well as companies that focus on the children demographics. Increasingly, the children demographics are very important to the game makers as well as the toy makers. We actually started working with Lego recently, partially because of that. And me personally, I actually have two girls who fall into this demographics, an 11-year-old who spent the last 3 years playing Minecraft, and a 7-year-old who's actually playing a lot of training mode in Clash Royale right now. So I'm very passionate about this demographics. And 4 or 5 years ago, partially driven by our client demand, we started tracking the video game behavior of 6 to 12-year-olds around the world because we realized these gamers, in a few years, they're going to be the main audience for a lot of you in the audience. So you want to know what they're doing right now to make sure in a few years you know what are some of the behavior and attitudes they will embody. So for the last 5 years, every year we do this survey in 10 different countries, including the US, UK, France, Germany, China, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, Russia, Australia. And altogether, these 10 countries probably represent about 75 to 80% of the global game revenue. And we have a lot of interesting findings. I'm going to share a little bit of that here today. The data was based on last year's research because currently we're actually fielding the 2016 research. And in about a month or two, we'll actually have fresh data and we will be able to look at some of the new trends as well. So we actually covered almost all the different devices and business models that you could imagine that kids actually engage with, as you can see here. And a big chunk of the study, of course, goes into mobile gaming, because that's one of the major areas. We're going to cover the entertainment wallet share, how much they're spending on different things, time share, brand mind share, what motivates them to play games, what motivates them to spend in games, and also some of the other gaming behavior as well. So first of all, if you look at the amount of money the parents are spending on these kids, 6 to 12-year-olds, keep in mind this actually included the holiday season, both the Christmas and Thanksgiving season in the US. In China, this also included the Chinese New Year period as well. So the numbers are a little bit more inflated, so don't just times 2 and say this is the full year spend, because this might capture 3/4 or even more, because as we know, holiday spending is a big chunk of their spending. However, with that being said, you can see the numbers are huge. In the US, $460 spent over 6 months for these kids' entertainment behavior. And in China, about 264, actually more than Japan and Korea, partially because in China, although one kid has like only 2 parents, but they also have 4 grandparents who want to spoil the kid as well. And being the single child, they do get a lot of money and spoil from their parents and grandparents. And if you break it down, video games capture a fairly big chunk, especially in the US. However, in some of the other markets like Korea, although overall gaming market is very strong, gaming actually is number 3 after toys and books. And let's take a look at the business model. What are these kids spending on? So as you can see, in the US, home console is still fairly strong. Partially because over the last couple of years, you've heard of the Toys to Life category. Although Disney just shut down Disney Infinity and laid off 300 people, but Activision and Lego, all these other companies are still heavily invested in that category. But overall, the home console category has declined over the last year, or between 2014 and 15, by 10%. And across all 4 countries, the single category that's been growing consistently is mobile games, especially in purchasing in-game items. It's grown everywhere in these 4 different countries. And the other interesting thing is a handheld game is still okay, doing okay in Japan. And the other market that's still doing okay is France, because somehow, weirdly, the Japanese people and French people have a very strong connection. The French people, they love all things Nintendo, and they're still playing a lot of handheld games and paying for it. But elsewhere, it's an insignificant category. Device timeshare, because China doesn't really have a very strong console market, so that's why you don't see console as a device for China. But overall, when you look at the amount of time the kids are spending across these different platforms, immediately you notice how big a chunk mobile devices actually capture, especially in China. The major devices are Android phones and tablets, followed by the iPhones and iPod Touch. iPad is actually a very, very small percentage in China when it comes to kids playing games. A lot of the kids, not just kids, overall Chinese consumers, a lot of the times they actually don't think about their iPads or Android tablets as a gaming device. They're more using them for streaming video purposes instead of playing games. That's very different from the US, where a lot of the kids, because the tablet is kind of a family device versus the smartphone, which is owned by their parents. So the kids in the US actually spend a lot of time and money on tablet gaming versus phone gaming. And the other thing you notice is the US parents are a little bit more lenient on their kids playing games. Overall, the kids in the US are spending 11 hours per week playing games versus for China, it's it's only about half of that. A lot of the Chinese parents, they still have this stigma about gaming, and it's okay if their kids are watching videos or playing with toys, but when gaming is mentioned, typically they are still frowning and they don't allow their kids to spend too much time on gaming. Let's take a quick look at what are some of the top-of-mind play brands. This is based on an open-ended question, so we didn't even provide a list, no aid at all. So the top brands in the US, it's unsurprisingly mostly console brands like Nintendo, Xbox, Sony, followed by Lego. Minecraft is number 5 already as a top-of-mind play brand, actually ahead of Disney and Barbie in the US. In China, on the other hand, although the console penetration is fairly small, but Sony is still viewed like an aspirational brand. A lot of the kids, they have heard of the PlayStation or the PlayStation portables, but they can't afford one. And it's really interesting. Plants vs. Zombies is the #2 played brand in China among 6 to 12-year-olds. EA didn't really start monetizing very well because of the piracy issues in the past. If you go to China, I mean, all the kids are playing with those playing cards, but EA is not seeing a penny of that. But it's still a very, very strong brand. And World of Warcraft and Blizzard, surprisingly, was actually #3 because a lot of the kids, especially in this demographics, their parents actually grew up with Blizzard games and played World of Warcraft, and they probably have heard some of that from their parents. And Tencent was actually #4 as a video game brand in China. So why do kids play games? Having fun is obviously the #1 reason across the world, not just these 4 countries, all the other 6 countries we looked at as well. But there are some more nuances after that. For instance, playing with friends was only rated or ranked as a #5 reason in the US, while it's #3 in China, #2 in Japan, and #2 in Korea. So it's actually more important for the Asian kids to interact and play with their friends through video games versus the kids in the US. And the other interesting thing is creating things is #2 in the US, while in China it's only #5. It's partially because of the difference in education system and philosophy. So the Chinese kids, they're not really too interested in creating stuff in these games versus just having fun or explore a story. Let's take a look at the top 5 mobile genres. There are actually quite a few differences among these countries. When we looked at the US versus Europe, I actually did the same presentation in Amsterdam a few months ago, comparing the US and the 3 European countries. You see more similarity, but here you definitely see a lot more differences than similarity. For instance, in the US, matching puzzle, physics puzzle, render games, those are the top 3 genres, while in China, it's Empire and Tower games, partially because of Plants vs. Zombies popularity, physics puzzle games, and racing games. And you can also see racing games is extremely popular in Korea as well, as a whole, not just among kids, but among it's not just the crazy car type of games, but also among the older demographics, like real racing games. And in Japan, it's RPG, puzzle RPG, Puzzles and Dragons, and those types of games dominating, followed by music, rhythm, and singing games. What are some of the top mobile titles? Angry Bird is still kind of #1 in the US from an ever played perspective. So 66% of all the kids in this demographic group actually had interacted with that game. That partially explains the popularity of the movie, even though the movie itself wasn't that great. Don't tell the people at Roville. Hopefully, none of them is in attendance right now. But it's still popular. However, if you look at the current engagement, only a third of the kids who ever played that game were still currently engaging with the game. Compared to Minecraft Pocket Edition, Minecraft PE, only about a quarter of the US kids actually had interacted or engaged with that game, yet 17% out of the 25%, more than 60 or 70% of the kids were still engaging with that game when we did the survey. In China, Plants vs. Zombies, both #1 and #2 are on the top 5 chart. So that franchise definitely has staying power in China. And in Japan, Puzzles and Dragons, as mentioned earlier, #2. Frozen Free Fall, #4, partially because of the overall popularity of anything Disney in Japan. They just love Disney there. Speaking of Minecraft, as I mentioned earlier, extremely popular in the US. My daughter has been playing it for the last 3 years, and all her female friends play. And during the summer, they go to summer camps. Last year, the 2 camps she went to were Minecraft robotics and Minecraft-based programming. But outside of the US, there's still growth potential or potential for another player other than Microsoft or Minecraft to come in and potentially come up with a similar gaming experience that will attract some of the gamers in Asia. Because right now, the exposure is still fairly limited in Asia, as you can see. In China, 84% of the kids have never really heard of the game even. And in Korea and Japan, also the majority of the kids haven't even really heard of the game. But the kids in Asia definitely will be attracted to that type of gameplay as well. Who wouldn't? I mean, it's an open sandbox, and you can pretty much do anything you want in there, whether you're interested in creating or following a storyline, exploring a world, or interacting with other gamers and dominating them. My daughter actually morphed from a creator when she was 8, building stuff, to now doing a lot of team-based play, Hunger Games, and Capture the Flag, and those kind of things. So one thing Minecraft is really interesting is the implications for these kids when they actually grow older. Because as we know in the games business, a lot of the industry pundits, they say, oh, female gamers are never interested in violence, or not necessarily violence, but competition or shooting or those kind of gameplay. But a lot of the girls in Minecraft, they actually do engage in those kind of gameplay. And when they grow up, they might be interested in playing Call of Duty or other types of more competitive games as well. And in the US in particular, the significance of Minecraft cannot be underestimated. Among the gamers who play that game, they're spending 5 hours a week playing. And among all the kids who play games, regardless whether they play Minecraft or not, that game alone captures 15% of all play time among all US gaming kids. Where in China, because the number of players is a lot smaller, the timeshare is also a lot smaller. So this just shows you, among the kids who play Minecraft, which devices do they play on. In the US, it's primarily the consoles, while in other markets like Korea, it's mostly PC and Android phone. And in China, it's mostly PC and Android phone as well. So if you are interested in developing a game for those markets, those will be the devices you want to look at. So this slide shows you the gaming frequency and session duration. Just a couple of key takeaways. In Asian countries, gamers are more likely to play daily on smartphones than on tablets. I alluded to this earlier. And the average gaming sessions on mobile devices, they're already meeting or exceeding the run length of an average TV show. And in a lot of the countries, games are kind of replacing TV to a certain degree from a screen time perspective. Where do they hear about mobile game apps? Word of mouth is important across the world. Friends and family to a lesser degree, but primarily friends. The ranked list in app stores being featured, what David mentioned as the fairy godmother, that's important as well. And YouTube is important. Ads on TV, not too important, partially because kids are not watching TV anymore, and partially because when they watch ads, a lot of the times it's actually in between game sessions. So those in-app ads are actually a lot more important from a user acquisition perspective than TV ads. And a lot of the kids actually search for new apps fairly frequently, as you can see. On a weekly basis, you're looking at 65% of the kids in China actually searching for a new app to play. That also means in order for your app to have staying power, the content needs to be really good. Otherwise, when they find a new one, they will jump on that bandwagon and forget about your game. Who picks the mobile games these kids actually engage with? Most of the times, it's actually the children who have more decision power. In Japan, however, the parents, I was actually surprised to see this. The tiger parents of Japan, instead of China, actually interfere with their children's decision a lot more than the parents in China and South Korea. So where do they get money from when they play these games? A chunk of them actually get allowances. Like in the US, only about 30% of the kids actually get monthly allowances. About 14% of them have like a gaming allowance, primarily for their gaming habit. And then another 15% has a general allowance. And among the kids who get allowances, it's actually a big amount. Almost $40 for gaming allowance among the 15% of the kids who do get one. And if you look at China, as I mentioned earlier, because the kids are spoiled by like 6 adults instead of 2, 60% of them actually get allowances, and the amount they're getting among the kids who do get allowances, the amount is actually fairly comparable to the U.S., although the average salary and GDP of China is still much lower than the U.S. But from this regard, it's actually in parity. Mobile spending in past 6 months. So in terms of in-app purchases, China leads partially because the business model came out of China and South Korea. However, Japan in-game purchases is actually a very insignificant business model among the kids. Not among 13 plus, but among 6 to 12-year-olds, only 9% of the kids had ever actually spent money on in-app purchases, compared to more than a third in China and almost a quarter in the US. And also, there's gender and age parity within the 6 to 12-year-olds. Both males and females, boys and girls, actually spend probably for different types of games, but the percentage of boys and girls, 6 to 9 versus 10 to 12, actually the percentage who do spend is actually fairly similar. So why do they purchase mobile items in these games? There are multiple reasons. To get a special item that you can only get through paying is an important reason across the board. But there are also, again, cultural nuances. Like in South Korea, character customization is very important. It's actually the #1 driver. And when I cannot pass a certain level, is also a fairly important driver in China and South Korea as well. So that's all I have for today. I think I have a few minutes for questions. I know it's a lot to digest, and this is actually just the tip of the iceberg of the data we have. But if you have any questions about the methodology or some of the specific analysis and insights I just presented, let me know.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about Plants vs. Zombies in China.
Yeah.
You said EA's making almost nothing from that. Is there any sign that they're figuring that out? And kind of maybe talk a little bit more about why exactly they're making almost nothing.
I mean, before it was more like a pay-to-download a game, especially when the game kind of first started. And as you know, the Chinese gamers, they pirate anything you need to pay for. If it's an actual game you're paying for. But with and also all the merchandise, it's all counterfeit as well. EA itself didn't really invest much money in making a big merchandise business out of Plants vs. Zombies. So that's part of the reason for the lack of success initially. But for the last couple of years, they actually had figured out how to make money in China through free-to-play Plants vs. Zombies, right? So as you saw, Plants vs. Zombies 2 was hugely popular in China. And I think initially when they launched the game, some of the Chinese gamers were actually saying, are you guys targeting us? You know that we actually spend more money. They were actually complaining how aggressive the monetization mechanics were in the game. So I think they are figuring out how to make some money from the huge popularity that game has, but still, they are still leaving quite a bit of money on the table from a merchandise and peripheral content perspective, because there's this misperception that the Chinese gamers will never pay for for authentic merchandise, but that actually has been changing. I mean, you have Chinese consumers who are kind of collectors. For the brands and the franchise they love, they want to collect all the characters or all the toys out there. And for those collectors, they actually want the authentic merchandise. Sometimes they don't know where to go because there are some fake storefronts that says Disney or Warner Brothers. This is funny because 2 years ago, my Warner Brothers client, who was the VP of consumer products and theme parks, he traveled to China with me, and we were doing focus groups in China. And a couple of kids mentioned Warner Brothers store in Shanghai. He was like, I don't think we have stores here. And so that's why they're actually opening 200 stores in China now, I think, based on the press release I saw recently, because they realized a lot of the people, they want to buy authentic. It's a matter of they don't know where. And sometimes, even though they spend $30 on like a little toy and they think it's authentic, it's still fake. So now I think there is a gradual migration to actually spending money on these kind of things. So that will help everybody.
I would love to hear about why consumer research is important for game and toy makers.
Because, I mean, number one, a lot of the people who are designing these experiences or toys, they are adults. They don't know what the kids want. And there are a lot of surprise findings when we travel with the clients and when we interact with a group of kids, and then the designers, the creators, and the marketers in the back room, they were like, wow, we did not know that's what they want. And so that's one. And then number two, overall, consumer and user research is extremely important, especially from a content perspective. As I mentioned, most of the brands and companies we work with are the large global companies that have really good reputation, really polished products. Part of the reason was because they integrate consumer research in every single critical juncture of their decision making, whether it's concept testing from a concept stage to when they actually have an alpha where gamers can actually play a little bit and see whether the experience is fun, to first-time user experience, the first 30 minutes, especially critical in the mobile space, because if you don't engage with the gamers, regardless whether it's kids or adults, within the first 30 minutes, they're gone. You wasted your $7 to acquire them already. So some of the clients go to the extreme of actually sending PCs to China. I actually did a project last year where my client actually shipped 12 top-of-the-line PCs to China so the gamers can experience the game in full glory. And then also from a marketing perspective, you want to know who your target demographics are, what clicks, what are the key marketing materials that will resonate. We actually recently worked on a very, very large movie based on games. I cannot mention the name, but you probably know what I'm talking about. And we did the screening for that movie. And after the screening, the marketers actually went back to the drawing board and redid the trailer, which actually emerged to be much, much better representation of the movie. So as I mentioned, I mean, if you are working on any consumer product or content targeting consumers, it's critical to actually know what your consumers want. That's why companies like ours actually exist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.